So there's this news that Roy Jones Jr. is set to trial some training with Anthony Joshua for AJ's comeback. You guys have probably seen this news by now. I know G-Man's done a video on it. At the time of recording this video, I believed he uploaded it earlier today. Yeah, I'm just going to give my thoughts on it. So I'm going to read some quotes from this TalkSport interview, or this TalkSport article that has an interview with Roy Jones in it. If you just go to the bottom of the page, it's talking about what Roy Jones says, and I quote, "He comes to talk to me too, so I'll be one of those guys talking to him, and we'll see what happens. We spoke the other day, so we're going to talk. He's going to come to the gym and see what we do. If it works out well, that'll be it. If it don't, he can go on and find a better trainer." End quote. So yeah, it's not the longest article, but it's really just about Joshua's current training setup. And, I think there's some stuff to look into here. I just did a live stream at the time of recording this video. I finished it about an hour ago, I guess. And someone asked me what I think about Roy Jones Jr. potentially training AJ. And I was kind of on the fence because, in my opinion, feel free to disagree, but in my opinion, I'm not entirely sold on Roy Jones Jr. as a trainer. I think he's a good, competent trainer, but for me, the jury's still out kind of deal. Because, and I know there are going to be people saying, how can you say that? How dare you doubt Roy Jones, the legendary Roy Jones? And now look, these people, I feel like they have to understand that the best fighters, the legendary fighters in boxing, they don't always make the greatest trainers. There are countless examples. I don't have to name any because you most likely know them already. And I'm not saying that Roy Jones Jr. can't be a good trainer. I'm just saying, for me, I'm not entirely sold yet, just because the body of work is a bit thin. Forgive my ignorance, but I can't really think of anyone off the top of my head who Jones has trained other than Eubank Jr. And even with Eubank Jr., we still haven't seen that much. We've seen some slight changes, but what have they had? 2 fights together, 3 fights together, something like that. It's no more than 3, I'm sure. So, yeah, for me, the jury's still out in regards to Roy Jones as a boxing trainer. But even then, Roy Jones is a good boxing mind. He's tremendously experienced, of course, as a fighter, but also as a pundit, an analyst. I always liked Roy Jones's take. When he used to be on HBO, he was obviously the resident boxer. Obviously, Jim Lampley, Max Kellerman, those guys, they weren't boxers, but Roy Jones was, and he was a mainstay in that commentary team. And I liked not only the banter that he had with those guys, but the insight he'd provide. He always knew how to read a fight, but in particular, he kind of knew the ins and outs of the dynamic of a fight. He was always able to pick up on certain things that Lampley and Max Kellerman maybe weren't able to, because they never went through that process of getting in a ring and fighting. But Jones, of course, has that experience. He's a legendary fighter. But from a stylistic point of view, I'm kind of wondering, not to say that Roy Jones would try and make Joshua a clone of him, like a heavyweight, a legitimate heavyweight Roy Jones. I don't think, I don't know, but I doubt Jones would try and do that. But I'm just wondering at this point, what can Jones teach Joshua that would benefit Joshua? Like, I'm sure that Roy Jones can teach Joshua a lot about boxing, about technique, but is it stuff that Joshua really needs right now? I mean, who knows what Joshua really needs right now? Personally, when it comes to AJ, I think, yeah, this whole looking around, trying out different trainers is good. It's long overdue. But I think it gets to a point where you need to settle down with someone. You need to get some consistency. And this is what I spoke about in the live stream. Progression is based off consistency. If you don't have that base, that foundation of consistent practice, the progression can't come from that. And Joshua needs to progress certain things right now. Not just physically, but mentally as well. And so he gets to a point where he's going to have to settle down with someone. And, we've seen how fleeting his relationship with Robert Garcia was. And it did look shaky going into that rematch where Hatman touched on this, where Robert Garcia, when he was being interviewed, he kind of, his demeanor and the way he'd frame his sentences, it was like he was having to go through a middleman to get to AJ, to communicate with AJ. It was like there wasn't any direct interaction between them. Almost like Robert Garcia had been training Joshua over Skype or something like that. And I know that probably wasn't the case, but it just, you didn't get the feeling of, okay, this is Robert Garcia and he's talking about his man Joshua, the guy who's training. There wasn't that feel. It was very strange. It was like there was distance between the two. And now we can see that Joshua is seemingly moving on from Robert Garcia, at least for the foreseeable future. He's wanting to be a free spirit by his own admission. Those are his words. I think it's good, but it gets to a point where you do have to settle down, I think. Just to quickly go back to Roy Jones, I personally think that if Roy Jones can offer AJ one thing at least, it would be maybe a little confidence boost. And now I think there's a lot of deep work that needs to be done with Joshua regarding his confidence and his psyche right now. But Roy Jones, watching him over the years, he strikes me as the kind of guy who has a contagious confidence. You know, Roy Jones always, and he still does now, even at what, 50 something years old, he's still got that swagger. You know, he's still, I don't know, there's just something about Roy Jones. There's just, there's a coolness, you know, a slickness, a kind of, just a confidence. And I think that would go a long way if he's working with Joshua. Being in that kind of environment where, you know, this is the winner's table kind of thing. You know, Roy Jones, Chris Eubank Jr., Anthony Joshua, if he joins the mix, maybe he can get a little bit of that edge, get a little bit of that swagger. I think that would benefit him. But from a technical point of view, I'm just going to say I'm not sure yet. I'd have to mull over it a bit more. If you ask me who I think the best pick, in my opinion, out of the trainers that are operating today would be for Joshua, I'd say Jonathan Banks. Now, I've mentioned this in previous videos. Initially, I think it was late last year, when there was news of Joshua first shopping around for a new coach, new trainer. And I said that this guy hadn't been mentioned, but I would have liked to have seen this partnership was AJ and Jonathan Banks. Just because if you look at what you get with Jonathan Banks as a training package, he probably wasn't the highest level fighter, but, you know, he was a legitimate, I think, was Jonathan Banks a heavyweight? I think he was. And so that experience of him being a heavyweight contender, he knows what Joshua's going to be going through. He can relate to it more. You know, this is not a one-time bantamweight champion training a former heavyweight champion. This is a heavyweight. He's been in the heavyweight division. He's walked in heavyweight shoes, as Joshua is now. But then if you look at Jonathan Banks' body of work, he's a Kronk disciple. That's how a lot of people refer to him. He's one of the last Kronk guys, one of the last old school Kronk guys. He has that system in his boxing DNA. If you look at his body of work, he's worked with Vladimir Klitschko, who there are some parallels with Joshua and Klitschko, because Klitschko had quite a few, or, you know, he had some rebuilding phases in his career. Klitschko famously wasn't the most confident fighter, but he developed a system of boxing, if you want to call it that, where his shortcomings, like his lack of heart, his punch resistance issues, confidence, you know, his anxiety issues, they weren't made apparent because he was able to get a bit of a stranglehold on the opposition because he really fine-tuned his strengths. And I feel like that kind of approach would work for Joshua. Joshua seems to lack that instinct. And so, okay, if you lack that instinct, which is something I don't think you can really teach, you need to have a bit more of a structure, a bit more of a system. And I feel like Jonathan Banks might be able to implement that because we've seen him do it with Vladimir Klitschko, at least in the past. So I'm just spitballing at this point. What do you make of this news? What do you think of a potential Anthony Joshua, Roy Jones pairing? Is there someone else, a different trainer who you think would be a better fit for Anthony Joshua? Who would you like to see Anthony Joshua pair up with? Do you agree with my assessment of Jonathan Banks being a good option for Joshua? Leave it down below. I'll get back to you. But for now, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.